What has been your most spine-tingling, bone-chilling, I have a bad feeling about this experience? What happened? I do real estate photography. One day I was alone shooting in an empty house, which is quite normal. I had this really uncomfortable feeling that I wasn't alone. I had already checked the whole house before I started taking photos, but I kept getting the feeling that someone else was there. The feeling was so strong that I had goosebumps and felt nauseous. I'm not a small guy, but I felt like a little kid scared of the dark. I decided to recheck all the rooms to ease my mind, but didn't find anything. I checked closets, bathrooms, bedrooms etc, but I was definitely the only one there. As I finished shooting the last room in the house, this feeling that someone was with me was so overwhelming that I pretty much sprinted out of the house. When I took the last shot, I felt better when I got outside, but I still had an uneasy feeling. The realtor ended up pulling in the driveway as I was finishing photos of the front of the house and asked if the house cleaner did a good job. I said it looked fine to me, and she went into the house with her husband to prep it for a showing. When I was shooting the backyard, I noticed them both out of the corner of my eye through a back window, but there was a third person with them. I was confused because they came alone without anyone else. Turns out the house cleaner wasn't finished before I pulled up and came in. She saw a large guy with tattoos come into the house in panic, so she jumped into the kitchen pantry and hid. By the time she realized I was the photographer, it was too late for her to come out without it being awkward, so she stayed in the pantry the whole time. I'm not sure if maybe I saw her out of the corner of my eye when walking past, or if maybe I smelled her perfume, heard her breathing, and didn't realize it, but my subconscious was screaming at me that someone was there. It was the most uncomfortable I've ever been inside a house like that before, and made for a funny story after. I should add that I had headphones on for the majority of the shoot, so it was 100% my fault for not being more aware of everything. I just assumed it was like any other empty house, so I was listening to music right when I came in and didn't stop until I had the weird feelings. At least it didn't end up with you getting a face full of mop. I love this. She hid because you looked scary and ended up scaring the crap out of you. When my kids went to bed, I used to go out to the barn where I had a bottle of whiskey stashed. I'd have a drink and ponder the day, think about my late wife, and attempt to decompress. I suffered heavily with PTSD. Add to that the recent loss of my wife, the stress of raising 2 children that didn't really know me, and intense pain from severe burns I had received before leaving the Marine Corps. It's safe to admit that I was extremely suicidal. One particular night, I wrote out a long letter to my family, letters to my children, and placed them along with my will, financial documents, etc. on the kitchen table. I went out to the barn with a .40 caliber pistol and had every intention of getting drunk and eating around. I was as low as I've ever been in my life. All of a sudden, my dad walked into the barn. He lived 2 hours away, and we hadn't spoken in a couple of weeks. He picked up the handgun, cleared it, dropped the magazine without a word. I asked him what he was doing there at 10:30 p.m. and he said, "I had a bad feeling. Let's talk." That's the one and only time I've ever seen my dad cry. That's the only time we've ever spoken in detail about our individual horrors of combat. My dad saved my life that night, and I've made sure to live my life in such a way as to make him proud of everything I do. Your dad saved your life, dude. I'm happy that he did. Glad he actually acted on his feeling. When I was around 12, I lived in downtown Toronto, and I was walking home late at night from the streetcar stop cause I was coming home from swim practice, and both my brothers had hockey in different parts of the city, so I was on my own. When I noticed 2 guys behind me, they were matching my speed and I could hear them talking about my clothes, and I was pretty paranoid, so I crossed to the other side of the street, which wasn't very well lit, to see if they actually were following me. They were. My heart just sunk into my stomach. There was a serial rapist running around my neighborhood at the time whose type was, well, me, and women of Eastern European descent. Also me, had been going missing lately, so I just started running. Full sprint. I didn't even look at the road when I was crossing the street again, but I was 12 and being chased by full grown men and was 2 blocks from my house. They were getting closer and closer, and I was terrified and trying not to cry and just keep running. I was at the corner where I turn onto my street and I could feel one of their hands reach out and brush against my shoulder, then again by my hair. He grabbed on and started to pull. Before I could even scream, the guy who grabbed me was full on tackled by this homeless guy that camped out near the library usually. He sat on the guy who grabbed me and started punching his accomplice. I was scared and confused. I just stood there crying until the homeless guy yelled, "Run, kid. Don't stop running." and that kicked me into gear, so I hauled ass home and triple checked that every door and window was locked and kept the lights off until my parents got home. We called the cops, but all the cops in my neighborhood were either corrupt or incompetent, which is why the serial rapist was never caught, and I suspect the cops were in on the kidnapping and trafficking of Eastern European women, so they didn't do anything. We parents and I found the homeless guy a couple days later and offered him some food and stuff to thank him. We talked a bit and found out he was discharged from the Canadian Armed Forces and wasn't adjusting well to being back. I saw him around for about a month or so after that and would say hi, maybe give him a juice box or spare change if I had any, but my parents found his family in another city and contacted them. They came and got him. My parents are still in touch with him. It was slow going and there were plenty of setbacks, but he's doing really well now and I'm so happy for him. If it wasn't him, I would have been at ped that night, if not worse. I'm so thankful he was there. Also, I wasn't allowed out on my own past 6 PM after that, and I always had a ride from swim team, whether it be a relative or friend's parent or family friend. That man was your guardian angel that night. I lived in South Africa where home invasions were pretty brutal, grew up on a plot, and lived in the flat adjacent to the main house. One night I woke up randomly around 2 AM and had this tingling feeling that something wasn't right. I opened my flat door to look outside and see if anything was going on. That feeling didn't subside, so I decided to get dresses and do a walk around the garden. Before leaving my flat, something told me to peep through the door, and as I did that, I saw some guy walking around the house. I then phoned my sister who lived in the house, but no answer. I then phoned my stepmom, and after a while my sister answered, which was really strange. I told my sister to wake the F up and walk around the house and make sure the doors and windows were closed as there was someone in the garden. She kept trying to blow it off and even said she'd unlock the house door so I could go inside the house. I told her that's a stupid idea and I wasn't going outside, since usually burglars are armed and dangerous and I had nothing to protect myself with. My sister missed a breath during our call, something that usually happens when one is frightened. So out of instinct I asked her if everything was alright. She should say yes twice. She only said it once. Turns out a group of men had already made it in the house, and they had a gun to her head telling her to convince me to leave my flat. A few seconds later the automatic light outside my flat turned on. I then told my sister it's okay, and I was going to sleep. I then phoned the police and neighborhood watch, which took the longest 30 minutes of my life to show up. Once I saw the police lights outside, I had to make a 100 meters dash to the gate to open it up for them. I then talked them over what happened and that we should investigate the house. I walked around the perimeter with them until we found where the guys had entered. We entered the house, which was totally trashed, until we got to the main room where there was a blanket over the bed. I then yanked the blanket off to find my whole family under there as they were tied up and frightened shirtless. This included my one niece. If it weren't for my instincts, they would not have hesitated to kill me and probably do worse to my family. They already poisoned my dogs. Must have been a guardian angel or something looking over my shoulder that night. That's mental. Very lucky for all involved. How come they wanted you out of the flat? What would that have done? It was about 9 or 10 in the evening, and I was heading home from a really bad date. It was a 10 minutes walk from where I was to my home, and I stopped by a red light and waited. It was in the middle of the week, and on the way from my date to the red light I've met like one person, so there wasn't a lot of people out. From nowhere I got a really bad feeling, and I knew that someone was watching me. I turned around and there was a man right beside me. He stood just a bit too close. He saw that I've seen him and started talking about how nice the summer rain was. I ignored him and started walking. Although the light still was red, he started walking to. I speeded up for a bit, so did he. My fight, flight or freeze immediately hit, and from nowhere I stopped walking. He was caught off guard and took a few more steps before he stopped too. He asked me why I stopped, and I almost yelled at him that I didn't want to speak to him, that his behavior is freaking me out, and told him to keep walking. He started to argue, and I yelled just go. He started walking slowly. I stood still, watching him as he walked. The feeling in my stomach didn't leave. It actually was getting worse. He stopped by a bus stop, and for a second I breathed out. He was waiting for the bus. Well, just next to the bus stop was an alley, a really dark alley, and behind it a dark parking lot. He stared at me while he stood there. He was waiting for me. I tried to contact a friend. No answer. I hid behind some construction materials, and on the third try I managed to contact a friend. She wasn't home and couldn't help me. She asked if there was anyone else there, and I said no. Eventually there was a man and 2 women walking by. She told me to tell them what's happening. During this time, the guy hadn't stopped staring at me for a second. When I walked up to the group to ask if I could walk with them, he suddenly started walking away. I was right. He was waiting for me. I walked with the group for a bit, but they were turning left at the next red light, and I was going the other side. I thanked them for helping me. We walked our separate ways, and within seconds the guy showed up again. I froze completely, and fortunately the group caught it and ran over to me. The guy saw them, turned around and walked away. They walked me to my doorstep, and I thanked them over and over again. I'm 100% sure that he planned on doing something horrible to me. I'm forever thankful for these 3 strangers who might have saved my life that night. Pretty crazy that the guy showed up again after you parted ways with the group. The time I noticed 3 men in a white truck following me, I thought I was being paranoid at first until I pulled into a gas station and then out the other side and they followed me. Even then, I was so used to being told I was overreacting that I didn't call the cops. I just kept driving in the opposite direction from the town I lived in until they got caught at a stoplight. I quickly turned into a neighborhood and took a bunch of random turns and drove around some more before heading home. I really hope that never happens to you again, but if it does, I was told once that if you think you're being followed, drive to a police station or fire station. Funny story, I was being followed at night by a car riding my tail very closely, so I drove to the police station. When I got there it turned out the car was a cop car. I couldn't tell it was a cop car when I was being followed because it was nighttime and there were no street lights. The junior officer behind the wheel was tailgating me so that I would speed up and he'd have an excuse to give me a ticket. Wow, that's so scumbag lol. Luckily when I get tailgated I just drive slower lol. I was out walking my dog when I got a funny feeling about my dad. He has heart problems and is prone to heart attacks. I called him a few times and he didn't respond, so I started to run back and he was slumped in front of the sofa showing all the early signs of a heart attack. I phoned an ambulance and gave him basic treatment, and after the paramedics arrived they said if I had been any later he would have died. I was walking home in the early hours of the morning. A guy came up to me with a baseball bat and walked alongside me. He started making weird conversation about how weirdos come out at this time of night. He drops a $5 bill on the ground and low-key dares me to pick it up. I sped up and made my way away from him, but the vibe was undeniably creepy. I didn't pick up the money. That was just your friendly neighbor, Baseball McFiddlers. So this was my friend's intuition, not my own, but it for sure saved our lives. About a decade ago, sometime in Jan or Feb, we were standing outside in downtown Chicago smoking a cig. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, she gets this worried look on her face and says, "I don't like this spot. Come over here." It wasn't 3 seconds after we took a few steps, no more than 10 feet, that this giant ice block falls off the building and shatters exactly where we had been standing. It would have crushed and killed me definitely, and her very likely had we not moved. It was so shocking that everyone on the bustling street just stopped and stared at us, mouths agape. You colder heard a pin drop after that. It was insane. I never looked at her the same either. She says she doesn't know how, but she had some sixth sense thing going on without a doubt. That's some Final Destination shit. A few years ago a group of friends and I went out clubbing. We went into this one bar, and the moment I stepped in the door I felt a sense of dread. Every cell in my body was telling me get the hell out of there. So after about 20 minutes, I convinced my friends that something felt really wrong, so we left and went home. The next day there was a new story about the club. There had been a shooting on the street in front of it, and the people who had committed the shooting had been inside the club while we were there. Geez, our subconscious can really sense danger sometimes when it is not apparent at all. The scientific term is spidey sense. The day I just knew my good friend had died, I had this horrible sense of dread and overwhelming need to get to him. I was absolutely panicked, like I swear I could hear a clock ticking in my head. I had been texting with him hours before, and we were supposed to go cut down a Christmas tree. I had to threaten the girl whose house he was at to go back to the house and check on him, or I was going to call the police. She had left him there to go decorate a tree at her mom's. I didn't have a vehicle and had never been to her house, so I couldn't even get to him myself. I was on the phone with her when she found him, absolutely gutted. Something similar happened to me. I was in college that time and there was this sense of emptiness in me for the whole day for no reason. I didn't understand what was wrong, but had this hollowness that told me something is not right. Unlike you, I had no one's name coming to my mind, but I knew someone I know is in trouble. It continued till late night. The next morning I came to know that a friend had met with a terrible accident and was hospitalized, while another guy riding with him had died in the same accident. Thankfully my friend survived, but the day and the accident still trouble him. Managing an overpass shift at a McDonald's. Just me and another guy in the store around 2 AM. I notice a beat up Ford Falcon with a mismatching bonnet hood roll into the car park. One guy hops out and immediately starts casing the place for camera locations and how many people are inside. This immediately raises my suspicions, but I pretend everything's cool and serve him as normal. They must have got spooked cause they get in the car and drive off after getting their food. Once they're clear, I called police and told them what's happened along with the number plate and vehicle description. A few hours later police come in and say they've pulled the Ford over and found a kilo of meth and several semi-auto firearms on board. Later on they admitted to scouting the place for another couple to rob us later that night. Lol. I wonder why they admitted that. Those are some dumb criminals. They could have just said they were nervous for the meth. They just probably added some more time to their sentence. They must really love prison. People with a lot of meth and probably stolen guns aren't generally the smartest to start with. I've told this story before but it never got much attention. After I graduated high school I worked at a video rental store in a strip mall of a smallish town. We stayed open late, and after 9 o'clock or so all of the other businesses in the strip were closed, and the strip mall would be dark other than my store which lit up like a beacon. Also, because the store was suffering financially the last 2 hours of the shift the closer was there alone, I was always afraid someone would try to rob us. I was a 19-year-old girl. It would have been the easiest score ever. But you know, I just went on. Anyways, there are apartments behind the store, so we had regulars who we were pretty familiar with. They'd cut through the parking lot to go to various places in the mall, so it wasn't uncommon for them to wave or come in and say hi or just browse. It was a laid-back place. One night I was closing the store, and I was alone of course, closing the tills and cleaning the store. I walk up front and 2 guys who were regulars are standing on the other side of the locked entrance. They're smiling and waving, mouthing hi and stuff. I wave and keep working. I notice they're not doing anything, just standing there talking, right outside the door. It comes time for me to leave. All my work is done. It's probably been about 30 minutes and I see these guys on camera just hanging out in the parking lot of nothing but closed businesses. It's like 11:30 at night. Everything is closed. I was really familiar with these guys, but I would have had to walk past them to get to my car. I just thought let's play it safe. I called my boyfriend, now husband, and just told him I had a weird feeling and could he come to the store so I could get to my car safely. As soon as he pulls up he gets out and walks up to the store, says hi to the 2 guys and waits for me. The guys turn around and leave to walk to the apartments behind the store. I thought that was weird, but just went home and forgot about it. About a week later one of the guys was arrested for trying to kidnap a jogger at a park in town. In the bag he had on him at the time was rope, duct tape and a knife. It was huge news. Oh, and also he was previously arrested for burning down a historical cabin in town, which was years prior. The guy he was with was a registered sex offender. It's probably been like 15 years since then and I shudder to think about what would have happened if I didn't have the feeling in the back of my mind that night. TLDR, regular customer watching me work, turns out to be attempted rapist. Good intuition. Good boyfriend. Good choice. Stay safe. This isn't as NSFW as others, but I think about it a lot. Country lanes in the UK are pretty narrow and have lots of blind bends. I was driving down a lane and there was a cyclist in front of me, in the middle of the road, not wearing a helmet, and heading toward a completely blind bend. I suddenly thought, if a car swings around that bend they are going to smash into the cyclist and pin him to my car. It was like a Final Destination vision. I couldn't hear or see another car, but I saw this accident so vividly in my mind. I immediately slammed on my brakes, honked my horn and pulled over. The poor cyclist guy shat himself and stumbled to the hedges. Mere seconds later some idiotic teenager comes speeding out of the blind corner and missed us by inches. If we were still in the road, this guy would have plowed straight through the cyclist and into my car. I completely freaked out, to the point the cyclist came over to calm me down. I don't remember much, but I know I was saying you would over and over again. I'm not a religious person at all, but that's the closest I've come to believing in some kind of divine intervention. Those country roads and boy races are fatal. My dad was a fireman when we lived in Wales, and most of the work was attending nasty accidents that took place on those roads. Used to hear some pretty horrific stories about the various ways teenagers and idiot drivers had killed themselves in avoidable accidents on country lanes. Not sure if it counts, but I work in a bar in Southern California, and while I was pouring a beer during the day shift, I had this very weird feeling about an earthquake happening. Nothing was shaking or anything. I just got this weird image of everything coming down briefly. 7 hours later the shift is over, and I'm at home on the couch watching TV, completely forgot about earlier, and wham, massive earthquake hits and knocks a ton of shit down in my apartment. Creepy to me. Foreshocks are a thing. Small shifts in the tectonic plates that some people are perceptive of, but others are not. They are why animals often behave erratically before earthquakes. They can feel foreshocks. I live in LA, and downtown LA isn't exactly the best place at night. I was going to a dispensary late at night in 2015, in an area of downtown that's not heavily lit, and very empty. No cars, no people, just a few rundown buildings on Main Street. It was late, around 11 PM, and the dispensary was just closing up. I came out, by myself, and started walking to my car. I was maybe 200 feet from my car, and saw these guys across the street and in a huddle. As I started walking closer to my car, I had this feeling they clearly weren't up to any good. So I started walking a little faster to my car, and one of the dudes screams over, "Why are you walking so fast, man?" And they started to walk towards me. Rather than answer and pause, I decided to start running to my car, and unlocked it and got in. As I was starting my car, they had run up to the back of my car, and just as I drove off, one of them slashed the back of my bumper with a knife, and they screamed, "Good thing you got those white boy instincts." Sometimes it's literally a matter of 1 second, and making that crucial decision to not stop that saved my life. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe to my channel for more curated daily Reddit stories.